Hi there. Welcome to this online lecture looking at inventory control levels. My name is Gareth. I'm a managing director with First Intuition. You're more than welcome to get in touch with me. I'm fairly active on Twitter. You can follow me at AAT Top Shooter, or feel free to email me. My email address is garethjohn@fi.co.uk. More than welcome to get in touch with me if you've got any questions, but I'm going to talk a little bit about one aspect of the costs and revenues syllabus, looking at inventory control levels. And you may be asked to calculate 3 inventory control levels in the assessment. And those 3 inventory control levels would be the reorder level, the minimum inventory level, and the maximum inventory level. Now let's just think briefly about each of those 3. Now in terms of the reorder level is the number of units of inventory that we would have when we phone our supplier to make another order. You can imagine if you wait till your inventory falls to 0 before you reorder, then it's probably going to take your supplier a few days to deliver. So if you wait till you've run out, you're probably going to have a few days with no inventory. You won't be able to make any sales. You'll have to turn customers away. So what we'd look to do is reorder before we run out of inventory, and that would be the reorder level, the point to which my levels of inventory had fallen to when I decided to phone my supplier. We've then got the minimum inventory level. Now the minimum inventory level is where we think the level of inventory might possibly fall to before the supplier then turns up with another delivery. The maximum inventory level, as the name might suggest, is the highest amount of inventory we might possibly have at any point. You can imagine it's important that we make sure we've got enough space, for instance, that we can cope with that maximum inventory level. If we didn't have enough space in our warehouse, we might end up with units being left out in the car park and getting wet in the rain. That wouldn't be very good. Well, I'm going to take you through how we would calculate each of these 3 inventory control levels. And to do it, I'm going to use some fairly simple numbers here, kind of numbers you might possibly be given in an assessment. Now, the kind of information you might be given, well, firstly, I've given information about the usage levels. So how much inventory do I use? And you can see I've given 3 usage levels. The maximum, so at most, we would use 10 units per day. Perhaps that's if demand is particularly high. However, on average, we would only use 8 units per day. And if things are very slow and not many customers are coming in, the minimum usage might only be 6 units per day. So we've actually got 3 different possible usage levels. We've then got 3 different lead times. Now the lead time is the delay between when I make the order and my supplier actually turning up to deliver it. You can imagine when you place the order, it might take them a day or 2 to get round to actually sorting your order out. It might then take a day or 2 for it to potentially then be delivered to you. And again, we've got 3 potential lead time figures. The maximum possible lead time, so if they're very, very slow, it might take them 5 days to get to me. However, on average, they're only going to take 4 days. But if they're very, very quick, maybe if they're not particularly busy, they might get to me within 2 days. So 3 different usage figures and 3 different lead time figures. And we've also got the reorder quantity. Now don't confuse the reorder quantity with the reorder level. The reorder quantity is the number of units that I'm ordering each time I phone the supplier. So when they do arrive to deliver, they're going to be delivering me 100 units that I can then put into my warehouse. So the reorder quantity is the number of units I'm ordering from the supplier. Remember, the reorder level would be the level my inventory had dropped to when I decided to phone them up. And in fact, using the information we've got here, I'm now going to work out each of our 3 inventory control levels, starting with the reorder level. As we said, if we waited till we'd run out of inventory before we phoned the supplier, we'll probably have several days when we can't make sales. We'd have to turn a lot of customers away. Now, the trick with the reorder level is we want to take a quite pessimistic approach here, quite a prudent approach. We want to make sure we do not run out of inventory. Running out of inventory is a bit of a disaster for businesses because it does mean you turn customers away, you lose those sales, you lose the money you would have earned, you probably upset the customers, so you might lose goodwill, they might tell all of their friends how terrible you were. So the worst thing is to run out of stock, so we want to make sure we're never going to run out of our inventory. Now, in order to work out the reorder level to make sure that we don't possibly run out, we're going to use the maximum figures. We could need as much as 10 units per day, and the supplier could take as long as 5 days to arrive. So I'm kind of looking at a worst case scenario here. So to work out the reorder levels, we take the maximum usage and we multiply by the maximum lead time. So maximum usage of 10 units, maximum lead time of 5 days. I would set my reorder level at 50 units. So when my inventory, when the number of units I've got in my storeroom falls to 50 units, I want to get on the phone to the supplier to make another order. Now, you can imagine if I do reorder when the inventory falls to 50 units, if things are as maximum, so if I am selling 10 per day and they do take 5 days, then I've got just enough units to make sales before they arrive. I'd never have to turn a customer away. In reality, though, it's unlikely I'm going to sell 10 units every day, and it's actually that relatively unlikely that the supply is going to take the whole 5 days. So you can imagine this is a kind of worst case scenario. This gives me a nice prudent position, so I should never run out of inventory. But in order to calculate the minimum inventory levels, what we're going to think about is perhaps a more realistic, a more likely situation. So for the minimum inventory levels, rather than thinking about the maximum figures, we're now going to think about the average figures. The average figures are more likely to occur. In reality, we're more likely to be selling 8 units a day than we are 10. And it's more likely the supplier only takes 4 days to arrive than they take 5. So in terms of the minimum inventory level, the way to work this out is you actually start with the reorder level. So as we've just said, we're going to phone the supplier when we fall to 50 units. We then knock off the number of units we're likely to sell before they arrive. Now we're likely to sell the average usage times the average lead time. Those average figures are far more likely than the maximums that we used for the reorder level. So, on average, we're actually only going to sell 8 units a day, and on average, the supply is only going to take 4 days to arrive. Now, if we're selling 8 per day for 4 days, that would be 32 units that we would sell before they arrived. So the inventory would actually, if we ordered when we had 50, we've sold 32 before they arrived, the inventory would fall to 18 units. So that is the minimum inventory level. That's what the inventory should fall to before the supplier arrives with the next delivery. Now, I always think that the minimum inventory level, the name itself is a little bit misleading, to be honest, because we're saying that the minimum inventory level is 18. That's assuming that we only sell 8 per day and they turn up in 4 days. Obviously, they could take 5 days to arrive. Remember, that is the maximum lead time, and we could sell 10 units per day. So we may well sell more than the 32 units that we're talking about here. So in reality, you might dip below the 18. That's why we set the reorder level at 50. If there is a worst case scenario, if the usage is 10 and the lead time is 5, we've actually got enough units to cope with that. In fact, this 18 that we've come up with is sometimes referred to as buffer inventory or buffer stock. The whole point of that is it's a bit of a buffer in case the worst case scenario occurs. So normally I won't fall below 18, but if I do, well actually it doesn't really matter because I've got the extra units, haven't I? But the trick with working at the minimum inventory levels is we use the average figures, the average usage and the average lead time, because they're more likely to occur. But actually, we may not even sell 8 per day, and the supply may not even take 4 days to arrive. So in terms of us working out how much space we should have just in case, to work out the maximum inventory level, so what's the maximum inventory we might possibly end up with in our warehouse, we're now going to think about the minimum figures. So if you remember, for the reorder level, we use the maximum figures. For the minimum inventory level, we use the average figures. For the maximum inventory level, we're now going to think about these minimum figures, because we may only sell 6 units a day, and if the supplier was quite quiet, they might turn up within 2 days. Can you imagine that's going to be massively reducing the number of units we're selling before they turn up? So to work out the maximum inventory level, well, again, we start with the reorder level. So a bit like with the minimum, we start with the 50, because remember, that's the point at which we phone the supplier. We phone them up when we've only got 50 units in the storeroom. But we're now going to knock off the minimum usage times the minimum lead time, because they may only be using 6 units a day, and the supplier may turn up after only 2 days. So you can imagine if that happened, we'd only have sold 12 units by the time the supplier arrives. Now, obviously, 50 less 12 would mean that I'd actually have 38 units the day the supplier arrived. And what we then need to do is add on the reorder quantity. Because remember, the supplier is going to turn up with 100 units, aren't they? If they turn up with 100 units, and I still had 38 units when they arrived, well, I need to make sure I've got space for at least 138 units. If I don't have space for 138 units, there's a chance I end up, as we said, with units of inventory sitting in the car park being rained on. Now, it's actually quite unlikely we'll ever end up with 138 units, because remember, this is based on the minimum usage and minimum lead time, and that's relatively unlikely to happen. You'd argue it's more likely we'll get the average positions, but you just never know. You've got to make sure you've got space adequate for those units if that does come to pass. So I'm hoping you can follow the logic of each of our 3 calculations here. The trick really is to remember which figures you're using. So for the reorder level, remember this is trying to take a worst case position. So use the maximum usage and the maximum lead time. What's the maximum number of units we could possibly sell before the supplier arrives? And that's the point at which we need to place our order. So the reorder level is based on the maximums. The minimum inventory level, though, is based on the averages, looking at a more likely situation. So in reality, we'll probably only sell 8 units a day, and the lead time will probably only be 4 days. Just make sure you're remembering that the figure is being knocked off the reorder level. So if I'm reordering when I drop to 50 units, I then sell probably 32 units before the supplier arrives, I would have typically 18 units as a minimum. And then when we look at the maximum inventory levels, we actually use the minimum usage and the minimum lead time. Because remember, that's looking at how much I'm potentially selling. So if you look at the minimum that I could be selling, I will still be left with the maximum possible number of units. But again, the way to work the figure out is you start again with the reorder level. So I'm reordering at 50. Knock off the minimum number I could possibly sell before the supplier arrives, which is our 12 here, based on minimum usage and minimum lead time. But then remember to add on the reorder quantity, because the whole point is the supplier is now going to arrive to bring us that many units. Well, I'm hoping that's made a little bit of sense of those inventory control levels. As I said, I'm available on Twitter, available by email. Feel free to get in touch if you have got any questions. Otherwise, I'm Gareth, and thank you for your attention.